Hi, I'm Tamar, and I'm the founder and facilitator of Mad Studies Birmingham. We don't normally record sessions, but this month I have. And that's because the session that we're having this month, which is April 2022, is of a lot of interest to people within the MAD movement, particularly those who are employed in lived experience roles such as peer support workers and survivor researchers. And that's in particular because this session relates to better support within unions, which is a conversation that those of us who work in lived experience roles such as peer support workers, survivor researchers, lived experience consultants have been having for a long time. So we invited Mick McKeown, Professor Mick McKeown, and he's a member of Unison's nursing and midwifery occupational group to discuss a motion that they're going to put forward at the health conference, which is at the end of April, literally in a few weeks. So one thing that I forgot to do during the session was actually to share my screen with a copy of the motion, which is actually at lxprevolution.co.uk. So I'm actually doing that now just so people can see it. You can also go and have a look at it at the website as well. But if you've seen it, just fast forward this bit here. But I just wanted to show people this is where it is. It's the recognition and reward for peer and lived experience workers. This is the preamble bit beforehand, which just kind of lets people know, particularly at Unison, who peer and lived experience workers are, kind of defines us a little bit. What I'll do is I'll just kind of scroll down a little bit and hopefully give you a chance to have a little read. And again, if just fast forward this bit if you have already read this. What I will do as well is for people who can't read on the screen very well, I will just pop something at the end of this video with me reading the sort of reading this basically. So I'll put this down, and this is the main important bit at the bottom, which is the actual call to action, which is here. So those 4 points. But again, if you want to, read it properly, go to lxprevolution.co.uk, and it is the most recent blog on there, methinks. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and you can go on to the meaty bit with Mick McKeown. Boredom.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so welcome to Mad Studies, Mick, and you're here from Unison to talk about a proposal that's going to be put forward at the end of April to support peer and lived experience workers. So would you be able to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the proposal?
Oh, okay. So I'm Mick McKeown. I should say that in my day job, I'm a mental health researcher mainly, but I work in education as well for people who are working mainly in the NHS. By background, I'm a mental health nurse. I have some ambivalence about that. I love being a mental health nurse. I love a lot of colleagues who are mental health nurses, but I'm troubled by much of the practice that gets legitimately carried out under the rubric of psychiatry generally. But obviously that's something we could maybe park and come back to if it becomes relevant to some of this. discussion. I suppose my, if you like, credentials for being part of this discussion is that for nearly 40 years, I've been an activist in the precursor unions that led up to this union, Unison, which is the biggest public sector union in the UK. And I suppose I also have some ambivalence about being a trade unionist. To anyone who's hostile to the idea of trade unions, I will defend them to my last breath. But I am not an apologist for all of the politics of trade unions or some of the shenanigans that go on within them. But I do like to think that my union is not the worst in terms of democracy, but it could be improved. I should say my job title is Professor of Democratic Mental Health. And my little joke that gets me into the wisecrackers is, if you find any democratic mental health, will you let me know? I think I'm sort of age eligible, but maybe too lazy to get up at the time of night that the meetings would be on. So I just as a sort of preamble into this, you know, and I should concur with what other people have said. Actually, it's great to see some, you know, familiar faces on this. It's also great to hear the sort of, you know, personal backgrounds in the introductions of many of the rest of you, and you know, to some extent, I feel like I'm at home in a sort of Mad Studies gathering. And for instance, a shout out to Lucy, for instance, you know, some time ago, and I can't remember how long ago it was, but it was definitely before I was eligible for the wisecrackers in terms of age qualification. I was very, very fortunate on a couple of times, maybe even 3 times, to visit Toronto and meet with people like Lucy, and more than meet with them, you know, be very, very looked after and shown around the place. And one of the places I was shown around was the old asylum wall that is still standing around the modern psychiatric facility in downtown Toronto. And as part of the work of Toronto psychiatric survivor archivists, who were also linked into Mad People's History, which, as I understand it, was one of the precursors of Mad Studies as a sort of discipline. Interestingly for us, that wall is being turned into a memorial to the exploited labour of psychiatric patients across historical time, for the whole time that place existed as an asylum, and into sort of contemporary times. And one of the points of one of the visits I made to Toronto was to look into community union alliances around the so-called Ontario Health Coalition, to see how useful they were in terms of, you know, the prime interest I have around the labour movement and the survivor movement is the possibility of alliance formation. And, you know, I'd read a lot about the Ontario Health Alliance as an example of labour movement organising that touched on community interest. But I was sort of disappointed to find out that mental health survivorship figured minimally in it. And some of the sister union who I visited while I was over there, some of their activities were actually contrary to a sort of more progressive politics of mental health, which gets me onto another thing that I'm interested in. I know this is a long-winded preamble, but I'm maybe trying to sort of set up a few things, is the lack of the politics of mental health on the left. So this is something that I think that has shackled the labour movement and impeded the possibility for radical alliances with survivor movements, is that the idea of mental health as being a politically contested territory hasn't always been that obvious to people on the left and in the labour movement, which might seem startlingly, you know, odd, maybe even shocking, but it is a sort of fact of life, I think. So many things that you know, people on this in this meeting would find as intensely problematic around psychiatry and psychiatric services are often taken for granted in the labour movement or not thought about so much. So I think that's an issue for us. And I think it also speaks to this idea of what's the identity of a worker when the nature of that work is framed around the life experiences of the person, and whether ordinary, taken for granted bureaucracies of administering employment don't fit that that sort of work role identity and context, which has already come up on this call. So that's a sort of long-winded introduction into who I am and where I'm coming from. And from time to time, I try to interest my union in more radical engagement with survivor and service user movements, particularly around things like the idea of a truth and reconciliation process for mental health services that would bring some honesty to the relationship between staff and service users and survivors or refusers of services. And more latterly, trying to push the idea of a sort of nursing conscientious objection to forced psychiatric treatment, which is slow to gain traction, but we're hoping to sort of move that along a bit. So I sort of am a sort of semi-detached user of Twitter. I'm sometimes on it a lot. I'm sometimes not so engaged with it. And I came across Tamar on some Twitter, and the thing that I tuned into was a, dare I say, understandable disgruntlement with
do you mean a rant, Mick?
Well,
one of my
let's
rants.
call it an understandable disgruntlement with some of my comrades in Unison in particular, because if Tamar doesn't mind me saying, she's a member of my union.
Mm-hmm.
And we got into a separate conversation, not in public on Twitter, about that, and certain things became clearer about what was going on for Tamar in particular, but that some of those issues were not unique to her and her role. And so one of the things that we spoke about was, well, maybe we need to at least start educating union comrades, union activists, leadership in the union and union members about the nature of this role, so that we may be in a better position to support people in that role and get some better labour rights and terms and conditions for them. So we began to kick around the idea of putting what we call a motion, which is a proposal to become policy within the union, to the relevant national delegate conference. So Unison is organised into different work sectors. So this would go to the health sector delegate conference, and like Tamar said, that comes up in the sort of last week in April. So this motion about lived experience workers is scheduled for discussion and debate on the morning of the 26th of April. And a group within the union that I'm involved in, called the National Nursing and Midwifery Sector Occupational Group Committee. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we love bureaucracy in the union and different sort of boxes to put things in. It's not the right box for this, by the way, but it was the box that I live in. So we were able to sort of try and persuade colleagues within that committee, which has the opportunity to present a motion to the conference. And interestingly enough, in terms of tactics, because it's already a national committee of the union, it's possible that motions that are presented from that quarter, rather than an ordinary branch, might have more traction, more likely to receive the support of the service group executive on the day, and hence less likely to be opposed. Can't take that for granted, but that's a possibility. In any event, it was a circles that I move in, which meant it was easy for me to move the motion through those circles. And I know on the bump that came out with the invite to join this meeting, there was a click here where you could see the text of the motion. So what I'm going to say is that the text is important, because if the motion is adopted and it becomes what in union circles we call a resolution, which is then effectively policy and binds the union to make the actions called for in the motion. Once it's a resolution, that text is a matter of record and can always be found. You know, we can say, well, what is the union's policy on A, B, or C? We can see that if you search the Unison's policy on lived experience workers or peer workers, you would find this resolution. And until the point it was superseded by any other change of policy, it would be the standing policy. Now, that said, even though the text is important, because this is contestable territory, we don't have to live or die by the text in this motion. The crucial bits of it, so this is the conference order papers, list of all the motions to be presented. And the important bit of the motion are the points 1 to 4 at the end of it, which are effectively the action points. So I'll revisit those now in case people haven't had a chance to read the whole thing. So the first action point is to commit the nursing sector, which is this group that I've already mentioned who are moving the motion, but in reporting to the service group executive, they are the people with responsibility for running this part of the union's business between conferences, so an important body, to a piece of work to shape the union's response to the employment needs of lived experience workers. And this to involve production of guidance for the whole workforce to better support the contribution of lived experience workers. So I'm going to come back to this, but I think this is important. What it's effectively revealing is the work has to be done. It's not like we have a clear-cut position on this, or even that there are easy answers or solutions. What the motion would commit the union to do is find stuff out, get a better idea, and produce more credible policy and actions based on a more comprehensive understanding of the workplace relations and employment experiences of this group of workers. So the action point 2 flows from this, and that would commit the union to conduct a scoping exercise of the full range of these roles and the terms and conditions that people are employed on, with a view to building a campaign to improve those terms and conditions, job security and career progression for lived experience workers. So, and they may be just some of the things. So there's some of the things that became apparent just on a brief think through the sort of things that people complain about. And some of them have already been mentioned on this call today. So, some workers in this job category are in what you might call the gig economy. They're not in substantive posts. And dare I say, the established unions like my union have been a bit rubbish in the gig economy, and that place has become occupied by newer unions that are maybe more nimble, more dynamic, but possibly less organized. So there's a trade-off here in terms of getting the power of a well-organized but bureaucratic union with resources behind you, or effectively doing it for yourself in a very grassroots way. Now, I want to come back to that because I don't think it's a binary either or. I think the grassroots, doing it for yourself, but doing it in a way that brings power, has got to be part of organising on any union issues, but including this territory. But it is nice to have some power and resource behind you that comes from being part of a really big organisation. And then the latter 2 points, points 3 and 4 in the motion, talk about working with stakeholder organisations, perhaps yourselves, perhaps other groups, together to develop education, training and supervision requirements appropriate for this group of workers, and to accomplish these objectives in alliance with the appropriate groups. Yeah, so that's the motion in a nutshell. And I suppose I want to pause for breath for a minute. It might be that at this point we can take a few questions, develop what the discussion points are. And I've got a confession to make. I thought the meeting was going to last until 6:30, and I see it sort of scheduled until 7. It may be that if I have to go at 6:30, the discussion will benefit from my absence as well. So you can have a proper discussion about what you want that isn't constrained by any sense of politeness. But I'm not worried about politeness. I think, I've got the new haircut. It's right down to the wood. I'm big enough and ugly enough to take things on the chin, and I'm well used to it, So I may have some answers, there are some ways of explaining why unions aren't always nimble, dynamic, and most responsive on some issues. So I can intrude some of that stuff into the conversation without necessarily saying that I think that's correct either. But obviously, there may come a point in this discussion where you'd rather have a bit of a discussion amongst yourselves as well, and I'm entirely happy with that as well. So pause for breath.
Okay.
If we can feel some sort of questions, discussion points, and then come back in on it, that would be great.
Yeah. Thank you ever so much, Mick. That was really, you've synopsised that in a really succinct and interesting way. So thank you so much. We've got a question from Mary, methinks. And just before you come over to Mary, just say we've put that it will happen that this meeting's coming on till 7. We normally finish at 6:30. The 7 o'clock thing is normally to cover the Mad Studies chapter thing. So we'll see how people feel about carrying on afterwards. But it's a great idea that, maybe we want to talk about it kind of in amongst ourselves afterwards. Yeah. But yeah, I'll come back to Mary.
Thank you, Mick. That was a really interesting race through your life and your life with Unison. What I just remember that we've been here before with Unison, and I think with other unions, there was a lady who unfortunately died now called Jan Wallcraft, who had a lot of input at one time to Unison. Have you got a headquarters on Euston Road in London?
Yes, so the old HQ where Jan knocked around was in a place called Mableton Place, and they've sold that, and they've got a brand new building, which is lovely, cost a fortune, on the other side of the road now. I mean, by the way, I was involved with Jan, right, going back in those days, and I do know what you say, and some of that started before Unison was formed. There was a precursor union called COSI, Confederation of Health Service Employees, and Jan and Jim Reed were involved, and did do some really, really interesting work. That sort of fell into hiatus a bit, and I've got to say, it's often because personnel change as much as anything else, or sometimes that's when you push for an opening, sometimes the opening isn't there, sometimes it is there.
But I think she, and I can't speak for Jim, but I was a close friend of Jan, so I knew her well, and I think there's other people here, and I think she'd be delighted that you've actually got as far as a resolution or a whatever is it, resolution, is that what we're after? Yeah. And that Tamar has been able to carry on her work and Jim's work to have the discussions, and things do move forward, that's for sure. And I think your colleague so can I just get an explanation? When this conference that you're having this resolution at, is that for the whole of the union or just for your bit? Okay,
so the union is organised into occupational sectors. So there's a local government sector, there's a sort of police, civilians who work in the police sector, there's a utilities like gas and water companies, and then there's the health sector. And each of those has its own national delegate conference. which is the supreme decision-making body for that sector, there is a bigger supreme decision-making body that's the overall National Delegate Conference, but they discuss issues that don't belong in the occupational group sector. So if it belongs in the occupational group sector, the big National Delegate Conference won't accept that as legitimate business. So what we call our National Delegate Conference, which is the big one, which this isn't, is largely looks at sort of bigger political issues and union rulebook stuff and everything. Mm-hmm. If it's in an occupational sector, which this is, it's in the health sector, the top level, the place at which it can be adopted as policy, which then binds the whole union, is at this level, if that makes sense.
Okay, right. No, I'm fascinated by all this, but I know other people might like to ask a question. So, thank you, and I'm really pleased you remember Jan and her work and as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Thanks. So, we've got a question from Phil.
There you go. Okay. Thanks very much, Mick. Lovely to hear and really refreshing to have such an honest sort of presentation of it as well, because I don't think it's going to be easy. And there's been a lot of problems perhaps in the past too. I just wanted to bring up another, maybe it's a problem rather than being helpful and suggest solutions, but there are people who are now being employed as peer supporters. But one of the problems that I'm seeing is that different trusts are coming up with different ways of keeping people out of the process. So one conversation I overheard recently was around, we can't employ peer supporters working in a trust if they haven't been in services less than X, or the opposite, that they've been out of service. They need to be out of services at least 6 months, you know? And then you get all of those issues around that. So those people never get in, and their lived experience isn't being allowed, if you like, because of the gatekeeping that's going on. Now, I know that the motion that you're suggesting isn't going to address that, but I'm just wondering, Mick, have you thoughts about how we can try and put pressure on that so that we can get trusts to be a little bit more consistent or fairer, or to hear the reasoned arguments? Yeah. Because it seems to me that some people are making those arguments with very little conversations with people with lived experience. So that was one bit. The other bit, again, perhaps just a problem, but every time I hear the Labour Party talking about what they're going to do about mental health, it just seems that they want to have more services. And they don't seem to be looking at transforming services or helping services become different because of the lived experience of people that we've got within our communities. So I just thought I'd ask your opinion on both of those two things.
Okay. I'll come to the second one later, but I think it's a very, very, very interesting point. The first stuff, Phil, I think it's, you know, it's not covered explicitly, but it will be covered because the motion, if it's adopted, will commit the union to finding out what all the issues are and trying to produce, you know, a well thought out position on as many of the issues as possible. The fact that if you like, the problem people in the way you presented that, or the employers, is good. You know, it's not good that they're doing it, but the union is quite comfortable with facing up to employers. You know, so that's okay. You know, I think some of the other problematics around, you know, around this whole territory is that sometimes the problem that is annoying lived experience workers is other union members who take against the idea of the role. And that is part of the motion to do something about that. I think the biggest, and I think it's a red herring, but I think the biggest issue for a lot of people who might oppose this motion is that they feel that lived experience workers are a lesser paid substitute for so-called proper workers. And that's something that we need to, sort something out about. Now, in principle, that should be meat and drink to trade unionists because it's a solidarity issue. And the way to solve it is to raise the terms and conditions of the group that are on the lesser terms and conditions. But that doesn't make it the easiest thing to persuade people of. And there's plenty of things in politics that are similar but different, where it's such a hard job to persuade people that they're on the wrong side of an argument. I mean, immigration is one of these things, anyway, loads of that sort of stuff that we could spend all day on. But it comes back to your second point, Phil. And I like to talk about the Labour movement, not necessarily the Labour Party. And I'm a dinosaur. I wish the Labour Party was the Labour Representation Committee that it started with, but it isn't. I wish the Labour Party was the party of 2017, but it's now the party of Keir Starmer. It's problematic. But even when it was the party of 2017, there still wasn't a well thought out politics of mental health. And this is why my hero in the Labour movement is Peter Sedgwick, who made these points ages ago. A proper person of the left, in the vanguard of the left, and he said to all his left colleagues, "What are you playing at? You take this edifice for granted. You think it's beneficent, and you think the only thing to do about mental distress is to keep referring people into it rather than have a go at changing it." I think the other interesting thing about Sedgwick, which is a more, possibly a more challenging point, is he also took issue with his sort of more revolutionary comrades who felt that once the revolution occurs, there won't be any mental distress. And he said, no, that's wrong as well. So we do need an at scale, ideally state-funded, not necessarily state-organised, but state-funded response to mental distress that's compassionate, humane, sophisticated, but not necessarily the psychiatric system that we know at the moment. And he felt the way to make that change was in broadly based cross-sectional alliances between people who use services, their families, the community at large, and movement groups like yourselves, but other movement groups like ecology groups, etc., etc. So these are, I think these are the important foundation stones of anything like this motion. And to some extent, the motion is putting the sort of cart before the horse, because ideally, if we had all the other stuff sorted, we wouldn't even need it in the first place, So yeah, I mean, I went to when Labour looked at its own democracy about 3 or 4 years ago, I went to multiple meetings with the Labour Party, and mental health, as you said, was just sort of rubber stamped, taken for granted, and people weren't interested in us or didn't have the time to be interested in a sort of more critical dialogue with services or the party's perspective on services. And again, I think you can sort of understand it, because one of the ironies for me is that at the time when Mary was talking, and people like Jan and Jim were helping out our union to get their act together around things like equalities, independent advocacy, and all these sorts of things, the big argument was, what do you do about services? They're not serving our wants and needs. But one of the arguments out of the service user movement now is, I can't even get a service when I want it. There's no beds. And if I get a bed, I mean, a friend of mine has just been from Liverpool, has just been admitted on a section to a ward in Maidstone, Kent. It's unbelievable. And it's completely inhumane. So, but there's this irony, we want different services, but we sort of want services. So what do we do? So Sedgwick said we should prefigure the sort of services, have a sort of prefigurative politics, try and sort of show, maybe on a place-based basis, how we can actually do things differently. And we do have those places exist in microcosm. And the big thing is about scaling them up, I think. So yes, Phil, you need to sort that one out for Labour Party.
Yeah, if you're up at the Durham Miners Gala soon, then maybe we could have a pint and sort it out, Mick.
Yeah, I think yeah, I was just sorry if you sorry, I muted you by accident, Mick. Yeah, I was just going to say actually that one of the things that I'd really liked about the motion was that it wasn't making assumptions about what was needed. So just as we've been saying, actually we don't, although we all know what our individual needs are, lived experience working is very disparate and very cut off. So you know, there's a few of us here at the moment, but what a lot of us do is really quite different. So the proposal talking about mapping that out and actually you know, trying to understand more about the lived experience membership and what happens is quite inspired, and it doesn't make those assumptions and kind of go straight in there. But I'm just thinking Ollie and Lucy have had their hands up for a while, so should we go to Ollie?
Hey, I was just wondering if maybe the diversity of settings in which lived experience work is done creates a challenge around the way the union organises in terms of the sectors, and if that is part of the issue around getting some sort of cohesive progress, because various things that I have been involved with feel like they could sit quite differently depending on how someone chooses to categorise it. And then as I was thinking through various other things I thought were important, I kind of thought, what is it that would be helpful for you to get out of meeting with this group? And what, if anything, can people do to support moving this and similar sorts of pieces of work to promote and to get a more greater recognition, greater rights and things around lived experience work?
Okay, but probably a number of things, Ollie, and great points again. In terms of what we could get out of it, I think if you agree with me that one of the fundamental things that would be good to do is to establish more broadly based alliances between critical groups and groups in the labour movement like Unison, we could carry on talking about these things. And if this motion is adopted and the union is then looking for allies to consult with, it could be that this group and groups you can point us to are the places that we go fishing for that sort of input and support. I think a very tactical thing that people could do is in their own workplaces, especially if they're in health workplaces, you could find the local union activists or branch secretaries, tip them off that you're interested in this motion and persuade them to vote for it when they're actually there. If they've got some issue with the motion, like they're against it or they're not sure about it, you could pass on to me what those misgivings are so we're ready for them. And it's all short time now, but if anything like that does come up, please get in touch. The thing about disparate workplaces is a challenge regardless of what the issue is. It's a challenge for all our occupational groups. And it's like, in the ideal world of trade unions in about like the 1920s, my family all either went to sea or were dock workers in Liverpool. The union was the community and the community was the union, and everyone lived in the same place, worked in the same place. It was dead easy to organise. Now we've got fragmented workplaces, fragmented jobs, and any sense of what you might call national bargaining for pay has been massively diluted. It is still something that my union wants to hang on to, national bargaining, because the enemy of it is local pay bargaining, which is effectively what's happening to your occupational group, because it's happened by default, because no one's bargaining nationally. To everyone, it's a free-for-all, which is where this flirts with the precarious world of the gig economy and everything. You know, anything that's a free-for-all is something that we don't like in unions, unless we can make it work to our advantage, you know. So I would expect that if the union does adopt a pay campaign around lived experience workers, the natural inclination would be to try and make it national rather than, you know, trying to persuade individual trusts, for instance, or voluntary sector organizations or whatever it is. And we have an overall mission that if we can get national terms and conditions agreed for any particular group in the NHS, we use that as our benchmark for negotiations with other organisations, like in the voluntary sector or the private sector. And we try and persuade in our other negotiations, people like commissioners to respect those terms and conditions at the levels at which they commission services and such like. So that's one of the benefits of having a large union. It can have that large view and operates at particular levels to, you know, to influence some of those things, but it's not a magic wand, you know. So for instance, my occupational group hasn't had a proper pay rise forever, you know, so there's no immediate promise on this, but I think it's a really good start. So again, Ollie, it's a bit like one of the points that was raised earlier. You know, if the problem is the employer, it's easy for us in unions to get our heads around it and do something about it. And we have, you know, folk knowledge, if you like, about how to do that. I think this territory is so complicated because some of the problem isn't the employer, it's our fellows in our union. And that's where we have to do this work. So that's why a lot of what's in the motion is educative. It's about the long game of actually trying to pull this around in terms of recognition, respect, and all those sorts of things.
Thank you. I think we've got, is it Lucy? Have you got a question next?
I wanted to add to the conversation because I find this issue one of the hardest, more complex social movement issues that we've had to deal with in a while. And having thought about this for like a while with some work I'm doing with colleagues, there are sort of three domains I'm particularly struggling with. One is the issues of employment and employment equity and the connection they have with identity politics, meaning that desire for employment equity is very much tied to identities of like lived experience. And this is sort of challenging because there are also hierarchies of disclosure. So there's plenty of people who work in various systems or even not in mental health systems who have had contact with mental health systems, but they're not out, or you don't know about, they sort of just go on with their work life, and their identity with the psych system experience is not disclosed. And there's a hierarchy of like who we know is out and who we don't know is out. And sometimes that matters because the job may require, my job requires that as part of the work that I speak to service user survivor issues. And so by virtue of that, it defaults into I'm out. But there are a number of jobs where it has nothing to do with identity, but because these people are hired into these roles, it becomes a sort of public display of people with lived experience doing the work, because it can make the institution look good. An example of that is having people who are navigators, like in a hospital or something. The job is to assist visitors find their way. But it is known that all those people that get that work are people with lived experience. And so there's like a bit of, I feel like there's a bit of a breach around disclosure around that stuff. Because there's this forced disclosure, whether or not the person wants that. The second is this issue of skill set, which is also very complex to me. Because on the one hand, I'm sure everybody on the call is quite aware that people who are service user survivors have been excluded, silenced, censored, erased, our history revised. And so there's a real desire to make sure that we don't become invisible. At the same time, having skills is important, and how this is navigated is still a bit unclear to me. And we see this playing out not just with lived experience stuff, like definitely with the pandemic, there were tensions between, for example, people who were nurses and people who were support workers and rate of pay here in Canada anyway, where personal support worker rates were raised and the nurses got really ticked off because they have been doing the work for a longer time and have like a steadier skill set. So I feel like we need to talk about skill set as part of this conversation. And then the third one is how do we deal with messy conversations about accountability? Because there are also areas and domains and organizations that are run by service users and survivors. So this is outside the institution, even outside of unions. And I've talked to a lot of service user organizations who sometimes struggle with the people with lived experience who work in their organizations and struggle with accountability and the assumption that because you're a person with lived experience, you can do whatever you want on the job, or you can come in late, and I know all these things have to do with like structure and support, but I think that there's a coalescing of all these issues that is making it very complex and very messy. So I hope that was clear.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. And there's so much there, isn't there? I haven't got any easy answers for a lot of it. And I think almost everything you mentioned kicks off another conversation that gets messier again. But I sort of want to come back to the idea that this motion is not, it's being written in a flexible way to open up these conversations. And we may not get to the bottom of all of them, but we may get to in short time, we may get to, okay, what are the simple things that are actionable that don't have any easily foreseeable adverse, consequences, and let's prioritize those, and let's keep the conversation going on some of the more tricky stuff, so that we're all together more knowledgeable about these things. I think in my union and in the health service, we've always had a tension between nurses and support workers, even before you factor in lived experience. Now, I think my union has done a good job of navigating that isn't to the detriment of the lower paid workers that are seen in the organisation as less qualified, and I think at the same time as respecting the credentials of, people like nurses, occupational therapists, etc., it may be that some of the absolute issues are fudged to keep that coalition together, but at least we're comfortable having those conversations. And to some extent, it's that thing that divides us from other groups like the Royal College of Nursing, who have a singular interest in the registered nurses, and that can be exclusionary to other, groups of other groups of workers. So, we don't always get it right, but at least we're familiar with some of those tensions. I think the doing the job and the way in which people are employed, I think you presented it in a very blunt way to actually make the legitimate point. But I can live with the idea that we can have different employment contracts for people in different circumstances. And if that means that people who struggle to get up in the morning don't have to get up in the morning, I can live with that, as long as the job in the totality is covered. So for instance, in my university job, which isn't the same as the health service by any means, from time to time, I've been responsible within the organisation for people with lived experience who've worked on projects that I've got the grant for and stuff like that. And I've either took a much more I've worked outside of what's expected in terms of management, line management, to accommodate people's particular, life rhythms or everything.
I'm not talking about accommodation, because accommodations are clear.
Yeah.
And they sort of help guide, and so we can create flexible workspaces, and we can accommodate. I think what I'm saying is, even with that, I think that there's conversations that are happening, certainly at the service user level, with service user orgs, that is messy, but there is, like, we have to figure out a way to have those conversations because they're not transparent, or people are afraid to talk about them because they get misunderstood. But I completely understand that, and yes, and there have been great examples of like flexible workspaces, but even within that, I think some people are having difficulty with accommodations.
Yeah, so I really do agree with you, Lucy. I mean, what I was going to go on to say is that on at least one occasion, what we decided to do was to all intents and purposes, the worker worked on university work, but they weren't employed by the university. They were employed in an employment space in a community organisation where the flexibility around their role was much better understood. And, the work still got done. It got done in a way that suited the sort of life rhythms of the person. If it didn't get done some days, it didn't get done. We could all live with it. But no one was saying, like in the NHS now, there's certain contractual expectations that you're pulled in for meetings if you have so many days off sick and all this sort of stuff. And I would see that as employment oppression. It applies to everybody. So it's not unequal, but it's not good. And it's more difficult to begin to have the conversations that you quite rightly raise in a context where the organization is moving far away from a quite simple view of reasonable adjustment, accommodations, etc., etc. So, but yes, I think we need to have these conversations, and we need to have them and deepen them till we're all, I certainly personally haven't got all the answers to these things. And it's very, very unlikely, I think, that we will find, a model contract of employment that fits absolutely everybody. But we might be able to inch towards things that suit many people, and we can work around the edges for other people, as long as we do the educative work and the employment relations work that needs to be done. But, chicken and egg, we know it sort of needs to be done. We're not quite sure what the destination point is, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The groups like this, I think, are the model for how we would have those sorts of conversations, because I think you can say things in certain, spaces that advance a debate rather than provoke defensive positions, and I think these sorts of spaces, and that I know the ones that you have in Toronto, Lucy, and the stuff that Toby organises around this Mad Studies course and various other places, when you're in a different space where there's a sort of quality of democracy,
Mm-hmm.
if you like, that's where, you know, you can actually disagree, or you can get the wrong end of the stick, and no one's going to like treat it as a vendetta. You can keep coming back to it and you know, work towards. And I think plural solutions is always a good thing. You know, sometimes unions have to be persuaded that that's a good thing, because, you know, the easiest thing to do is look for a one size fits all solution. But that is the problem of psychiatry, isn't it? You know, if we had lots of different things that suited different people at different times, we wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we've got. And I think one of the different things that suits different people at different times is lived experience. Peer support doesn't suit everybody. You know, not every single person who's had this lived experience would make a good worker in that regard, but it certainly suits a lot of people a lot of the time. So why shouldn't that be a valued job that's distinct from other jobs? So it's not the enemy of other jobs, it's supplementary to other jobs. So I think these are the things that we need to be sort of pushing at and trying to sort of bottom out. How best do we understand it, and then how best do we persuade anyone who's getting in the way of it is the thing, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's one that comes up every almost for every single conversation that happens in the movement, in that there are kind of multiple arguments, and all of them are right, usually from the standpoints that people are making the arguments from. So it's a really good good point to be made. So I'm just thinking that Tina's, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, but it's a virtual hand, so that's really great, because I'm very lazy, and actually having to put my hand up is very tiring, you know, unless I'm lifting a cup of tea or a pint. So I like the sound that, yeah, the Durham Miners Gala, dearie me, I'd love to go. Anyway, that's in for a southerner. I was just looking at your wording. I don't want to get into semantics. You know, I guess when we talk about lived experience workers, is that going to be defined for the union so they understand? You know, because you get people saying, "Oh, we've all got lived experience of this, that, and the other." So we want to be, don't exclude, but you know, it's about the mad people who definitely go into that line of work, you know, because you know it's now cachet to have a mental health you know problem, and we've all you know blah blah blah. So I guess you're always going to have pretenders, you know, at these things, and people that try to cash in, you know, by joining, you know. But I guess it's difficult. Are we going to be able to explain what we mean by lived experience, or hold the space is held, you know, not without sounding too precious, but the space is held for who we think we are, you know, talking about.
I would hope so, Tina. I think we wrestled a bit with what to call this motion, what descriptive term to put in, and I suppose we could have went with peer workers, but that doesn't necessarily cut the mustard for everybody either. And I suppose, you know, we do this scoping exercise, we see what jobs are out there, how they're described, you know, what are the expectations of it, who fills them. We make.
It's good enough for the motion, you think? You think that would, they understand the difference.
Put it another way, Tina, I had to write a separate briefing for the person who leads this nursing sector committee, so that everyone else would understand what this motion is about.
So you have explained
even though the motion feels to me to be quite self-evidently clear what it's about. I should say as well, actually, that you have to be, the nursing sector committee that has produced this motion has 2 delegates to this conference, and one of those will move this motion, which is the act of getting up first to speak to it. And that's not going to be me, because I'm not the nursing sector delegate to this conference, but I am a delegate via my local branch. So I will speak to this motion, but I won't be the first person to speak to it. But I've written speaker notes for the person who will be moving it. So if they just read out my speaker notes, I will effectively have been the person moving it, but they're quite free to present it whichever way they want to. And hopefully there won't be too much opposition. If people line up to speak against it, we'd be looking for other delegates to come and speak for it as well. You might think that union conferences are full of people who really want to get up and speak, but the opposite is often the case. So sometimes people have to be really persuaded to be confident enough to actually come up and speak to the conference, because they are big rooms. There's like, you know, hundreds of people in there, and you're on this like little podium at the front that moves up and down depending on how tall you are. And it has, interesting enough, they have a big screen behind that shows your face big, and what's it called? Auto caption generated subtitles that's your speech. But because they're done in real time, they often mangle the words. So it'll be interesting to see how lived experience worker survives that process. Anyway, so that's just a digression. But just to put you in the picture, I'm not the prime mover of the motion, but I will be speaking hopefully second on it.
I just for that actually, that I'm also one of the delegates who are going for my from my local branch, so I'll be speaking to it as well, just sort of in support of it. And if anyone wants to send me anything through to kind of sort of pitch into that speech, or kind of, you know, please do. You know, that would be amazing. And that's kind of the whole point, really, you know, trying to get as much input as possible from other people. And now that you've said that, Mick, I tell you what, I'm going to have written it. It's going to be a blooming, what do you call it, like a manuscript thing. I'm not going to be speaking off the top of my head.
I mean, that's,
it can be,
I would say that's
subtitles. It's going to be written down word for word.
I mean, that's no problem at all. You only get a very short amount of time.
Oh yeah,
so
it's
I
like
would
2 minutes, isn't it?
I would try and work out what's the thing that I want to say, and say that, you know. And you know, obviously I think your contribution will be really powerful, because it's a contribution from one of the workers who's, you know, the substance of the motion. So mine will be the contribution of an ally, I hope. But I don't ever think that's as persuasive as someone speaking in the voice of that workforce. And what you'll probably find is the majority of the delegates, I like to think, are they're on the side of the workers. So if one of the workers gets up, even if the initial inclination might be, I'm not too sure about this motion, they then become fond of you, because you're like standing up speaking to it from an authentic position, and that usually goes down really, really well.
Oh, thank you. I'm just thinking of the because obviously I've had a bit of a whinge, and I might have had a bit of a whinge to me, you know, the regional and maybe the national person, because of, you know, maybe insufficient help. So might have to win a few people over.
People are open to criticism, you know. And I should have said, by the way, as well, you know, I think one of your whinges was about the way in which legal representation, like from a barrister or a solicitor, has a gatekeeping process attached to it. And usually if it's something that is subject to the possibility of an employment tribunal, it's a very high threshold at which they will want you to be above before they'll commit union resources to paying for barristers, because they're expensive. And the people who make that decision are a team of lawyers one step removed from the union, and they don't want to be doing work that is effectively for free if you don't win. To get me?
Yeah.
So, but what I'm trying to say is, this is an issue for every delegate in the room. We all don't like the fact that that's the way that the union does things. So, or at least a lot of us don't. So there's always a motion to National Delegate Conference about that very point. So you won't be friendless if you make a criticism on that score. It's also, though, a bit tangential to the actual core of the motion. I think one of the things you should really say something about the personal experience of being this worker, and the idea that if this motion is passed, it'll make you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, feel like you properly belong to the union and have the union behind you, rather than be feeling like you're working against the union. Something like that, you know.
Yeah, that would be, that sounds good. And I'm thinking as well that others have had a very similar experience to me. And I know that someone I was talking to who came from a sort of a line, you know, like a family line of kind of union stewards who hadn't been supported as a lived experience worker. You know, the family had been massively into it, but not as lived experience workers. And because of the poor way that this person was treated, they'd sort of given up their membership. But, you know, it's because of the different way that we are treated as members of the union. So,
so the other thing that persuades unions is any idea that they would lose members or lose the opportunity to recruit members is an important lever on union support. And I'll certainly be making that point. But, you know, obviously, feel free as well. You know? I mean, it's coming up to the time that I have to push off. Is there anything quickly before I go? And obviously I'm happy to come back to future meetings, especially if you've got something positive to report around this motion.
Yeah, so you've got Phil, and then if it's kind of, if you can make it as quick as possible, we've got Phil and then Mary.
Okay, Mick, are you going to make that point in your speech that it is actually a possibility that you will increase members because people with lived experience will have somewhere to be represented and have a discussion?
That is one of the points that I'd like to make. Yeah, and if we had more time, I'd try and link it to the wider organising mission of the union. So they do I think recordings of the debates as well. So it may be that we can grab hold of that and bring it back to this group.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate.
Cheers. Then we've got Mary.
I've got to go as well. No, we're not going anywhere together, I know, but I've got to leave as well. But it's just, where is this conference?
It moves around the country, but it's in Liverpool in April.
In Liverpool in April. Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Good luck for Tamar, and good luck for you as well as an ally. I think that's a really good word that seems to have been forgotten a bit. So I think it's a good word to have. Thank you.
Cheers. Well, thanks very much. I've really enjoyed speaking with you all, but if you don't mind, I'll have to push off now. So
thank you so much, Mick. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers. See you then.
Take care. Thanks.
Sure.
Bye. See ya. That was an excellent conversation. And thank you for everybody for participating as well. You know, some really good points that were made. So, do you want to carry on having a discussion about it, or are you all talked out? Silence.
I think what I found really interesting was that Toby knows and Julie knows, we're going to be having the session on Mad Pride Survivor Movement. Is it next week or the week after? Anyway, and it's often that conversation that it's the first time that people. It certainly was when I started doing it. a couple of years ago, it was the first time I realized that there was more than just individuals, you know, that there were people all over the place. And as you can see from this group around the world, who are having similar discussions. And it's this feeling of, how do you represent this disparate group of people who have sometimes contradictory or differing voices? But it's something that, yeah, it was good to hear that it's happening. Something's happening, at least, from what Mick was saying. Yeah.
Phil, you've kind of like, suddenly you've got sparks pinging off in my head. Is that, yeah, you have. So you have, they're going ping, 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 ping. Your Mad Pride stuff that you're doing, is that just where you are, or are you linking stuff nationally?
So there's one of the sessions that we run on the Mad Pride course, which is we have somebody who talks about the history and the background towards the idea of survivor movements and Mad Pride in general. And it's this idea of not giving one view of it, but to say, look, there's a massive variety of different ways in which people have done it. But it always sparks quite a lot of conversations. And we do try and have a conversation around what would a Mad manifesto look like, you know, and try and be a bit creative and thought-provoking.
Because you've just made me think, actually, and it's going back to something that Mick had said about trying to get members nationally to get their branch reps to support the motion, so to try and get votes to getting it through. So there might be something about, I'm just thinking, particularly in the next few weeks, trying to build awareness with people who are members kind of nationally, speaking to their branch reps to try and get support for this. But also, I think just building an awareness generally, where if there's some chatter about it online, then it kind of builds a bit of a buzz, if that makes sense. So you know what Mick was saying about actually unions care about whether they get more members or whether this is actually a thing. It's actually, do you know what, we're here, we're around, and it's like he was saying, like the unions and the labour movement and the left have often just dismissed mental health, and it's not being seen. It's, is there something we can do in the next few weeks that can help to sort of legitimise or get this onto people's radar a little bit? So I'm just wondering if because we've got people from different areas on the as part of the group, if there's things that people think they can do from the areas they're from. Even internationally, there's people still have got voices from, like online presence from where you're at. Anne, so you've got your hand up.
I just want to bring in, and maybe this is off topic, but a different thing that's happening here in the United States, and it has a lot to do with funding and behavioral health. So the addictions is kind of taking over the mental health. And I went back to mental health peer training. I mean, I helped start it up years ago, and I just went to 2 trainings, the new ones with the new people coming in, just to see what it's like. And they've rewritten our history. They've written our MAD history from an addictions lens. They've taken things out. I wondered, and a lot of it has to do with funding here in the United States. Opiates and everything is really big, and it's what's happening with us. And even our language, our values, we have a conference in Oregon with 600 peers, and it was overtaken by the addictions values. And we're like, we got to start a new conference because we're not really welcome anymore in our own conference. Is this happening there? And does that affect in the unions or anything like that? Oh, good to hear. Okay. It's just, happening here. And again, it's the United States. We're weird anyway. Things are going weird now, and especially Portland, Oregon. I think you probably heard about our weird stuff, but no, it's happening all over the United States where addictions, and it's just a different way of thinking, where peer support and addictions goes back to 12 steps, goes back to rules like that. And we're just more like everyone finds their own way. And
I was gonna say, Anne, is it because of the 12 steps? Is it that they're bringing that in, which we don't have in mental health in the UK? Bits of Ireland they do, and in some places, but then there are lots of 12-step recovery people in mental health as well. I've come across. So, you know, is it that like the
stigma, because those of us with mental health issues, we speak out, we're not as well accepted as those with addictions at the moment, because addictions is the big thing now. And it's yeah, it's just the cultural things right now. So actually there's all kinds of, steps are not bad. It's just, we are also saying peer support is walking with and no judgment. And
yeah.
It's just a different way of thinking. And so how do we find the middle, and dual diagnosis? And
no, we're rubbish in the UK. We ignore, you know, they're just trying to ignore, well, I've been ignoring everybody for years really about this, but there are sort of murmurs of oh gosh, yes, we do need to think about, you know, the comorbidity. I hate that term, but yeah, there you go. Oh, there you are. You know, but the interplay between the both, basically, and often, you know, you have one, you have another, and etc. So no, I'm afraid our colleagues in addictions are still very much low down the food chain when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, you live in an interesting state, though. Oregon does some.
Yeah. It's often where the funding's at, isn't it? And that's where the power and the decisions are made, and that's the problem. That's so I suppose if you get people offering to fund a conference and it's coming from, the money's coming from sort of addictions, but the problem is that actually whoever's doing that conference should be holding fast to, actually, this is a mad conference, this is a mad pride, you know, this is a mad history, this is a mad conference. It's kind of, you know, addictions can do their own conference. And yeah.
But we have behavioral health now in the United States, so they put everything together. So that's the way it is. We'll just make our own. It's okay. We were talking, the villagers were talking like, how do we make another conference? You know,
what do they mean by behavioral health? It's just a fascinating term. What do they throw in?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I absolutely hate that term.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, I can tell. It's very artificial, and it came in, I would say, about 10 years ago. And it's the government and then studies, and now we've got behavioral digital health and behavioral everything health, and they just put us all together. That's it. Wow. And so I'm kind of fascinated and happy to hear it hasn't happened over there yet.
Bloody hell. There's a chance it probably will.
What was that? What was the term that you didn't like? Sorry?
Oh, behavioral health.
Behavioral.
So everything is now called behavioral health. They've taken, in fact, at the conference, they stop talking about mental health. They'll talk about addictions, trauma. They don't even use the word mental. We're actually being kind of taken out, edited out.
Wow. Whew. I thought we had it bad.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking, kind of bringing it back to the and thank you, because Anne, those are really salient points, and they do link in to the conversation about unions, you know, because of it all links in. But I'm just thinking about in the next kind of few weeks, what do you think? What do people think about what we can do to actively, you know, get sort of local branch stewards on board, or just get some awareness of this out there? And I'll start off with what I've done in terms of, obviously, kind of had this group. I'm involved with LXP Revolution, so help sort of write stick the LXP Revolution article up, and then obviously I'm going and will support the motion as well. But ideally, there's going to be other people that will be supporting and kind of pushing for that too. So I'm just wondering if what ideas other people have got. Lucy, hey.
It's not so much because I'm not in the UK, but I think because these conversations are so pervasive in so many other sites, it would be great if there was a marking or mapping of the process in order to teach others how to do it.
Yes.
Like a how-to. I think that would be very powerful.
Oh, thank you. That's a good point, actually. That's really good. And particularly, we've been doing this in MAD studies, so the whole point is about MAD knowledge and how we encode it and get that out to other people. So thank you. You've kind of stated exactly what we should be doing. So thank you very much. Yes. And Phil, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Tim, I was just wondering that within Unison, there wouldn't be anything on somebody's membership form about their particular mental health issues. However, if they've got lived experience, is there any way that you can ask or get information? Because it seems to me that there's going to be a lot of people who are presently union members who don't even know that this motion is going forward, perhaps.
Oh, yeah, they won't.
How can that work? Any ideas?
Yeah, and I think the problem is that it's kind of within the proposal itself, which is basically the union doesn't really know much about who's in the union, who does have blah blah blah. So it's kind of about having a mapping exercise to find that out. And the other thing is as well, so it's kind of like most things in the lived experience kind of world, sort of happened at the last minute and kind of come up from, there's been a problem, like I've had a whinge on social media, someone's picked up on it and gone, actually, we've got this thing coming up, let's try and stick this in and see if we can do something. So it's again, it's never ideal, it's never it's one of those things, it's never kind of like, like a lot of things get planned and funded and all the rest of it, and often we're sort of like the add-on, but I very much appreciate that Mick's kind of done this, but we always kind of rely on the kindness of allies, don't we, as opposed to being able to do this ourselves, which is frustrating. Yeah, it's not for the want of trying, by the way, but yeah. I was just wondering about Stan as well. Sorry, I don't want to pick on you, but it's just that I know that you're I'm so sorry, my husband is calling me. Go away. I've just deleted him. Here we go. Yes, Stan, I was just gonna sort of because I know that you've been doing a lot of work on this. So I was just going to sort of ask you what your sort of takes were on it. I'm sure you've got loads of takes on it, but just if you've got any ideas about how to I'll shut up. Just over to you.
Sorry, no, you put me in the spot now, Tamara. No, it's fine. I've been thinking about this just now, just listening to these conversations, because, I mean, the issue of sort of unionizing and thinking the kind of, well, in my case, it would be user researcher, but sort of peer worker, peer support worker in healthcare, mental health care, through the kind of union arguments and solidarities and sort of linking up is something that I think is absolutely crucial. But I can see how, with all the challenges and the issues that Mick and others have talked about, I can see how that project is much more, not achievable exactly, but sort of circumscribable. You can really think it through in terms of motions within Unison, because Unison has this, sorry, I can hear myself twice. Oh, it's a bit weird. So Unison has these groups divided according to sorry, you've muted me. Anyway, and so I'm not really sure in the union I'm part of, which is, the University Staff Union, UCU, how we can think of an equivalent, because although, I'm a survivor researcher, there are other people who are survivors like Len here working within patient and public involvement in something like an administrative stroke research role. So there are all these kind of small categories, but it's a tiny, tiny number of people within a union that doesn't have this subdivision. So there isn't sort of like a mental health research group within UCU, if you see what I mean. It's UCU. So trying to think how that argument could be made, not just around mental health as an issue, but around mental health, survivor workers as part of the workforce, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. So what I've been trying to do in a different way is to think how we can, think more about survivor researchers as a workforce, because a lot of the writing about survivor researchers has been about survivor researchers versus conventional researchers. And, what are conventional researchers when you think about the workforce? You're thinking about a casualized workforce, you're thinking about a gig economy, you're thinking about the kind of foot soldiers of research who are sort of treated like shit increasingly, and are kind of anonymous and so on. So how to bring solidarity between different kinds of precarious workers. But in terms of motions in the union, I'm not so sure. Sorry, I've just taken up too much space. Apologies.
No, you haven't taken up too much space at all. It's all good points, I would say. Yeah. I think what I could think of from, I suppose, perspective of someone who sort of works across all kind of like, sort of health, so employed health, kind of gig consultancy and training and that, and then also research and more, I don't know, academic-ish stuff, is that I think the issues that we have across whatever lived experience work that we do are often very similar, in that it's being treated like shit because we are at it's having that label and being sort of at the bottom of a hierarchy, no matter what that hierarchy is, if that makes sense, because of the stigma that goes alongside mental health, for whatever yeah, it was. And I think that's one of the reasons why when I'd spoken to Mike about this, I'd suggested that instead of putting peer worker or peer support worker, which, like, straight away when I hear peer support worker, I don't think that doesn't talk to me, because I'm not a peer support worker. I've never worked as one. It's different to what I do, and so that's why I kind of said, well, if you have lived experience worker, and then think about the range that can cover, because that can, that does include peer support workers, but it also includes anybody who does who works within any sort of kind of post, or, you know, any other kind of discipline, or any other sort of different, I hate to say hierarchy, because it's horrible saying hierarchy, isn't it, within lived experience working, but sort of, you know, sort of strategic seniority, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, roles, or, you know, but it was just that, it was just knowing that whoever was working in whatever roles people are in, you know, if you're a lived experience commissioner, you are treated like rubbish. And I remember having a conversation with someone who was a commissioner, who went from being a commissioner to being a lived experience commissioner, and she said that people she'd worked with for years overnight treated her very differently as a lived experience commissioner, you know. So it's kind of the same, I mean, not completely the same, but there's very similar issues that we face. So yeah, someone else got their hand up while I was waffling. Looked like someone else was wanting to say something. No. I've stunned you. Silent.
I've got to go now. So.
Oh yeah, it's actually almost 7 o'clock. That's why you're all quiet. You're thinking you want to go home. Yeah. It's gone so quickly. I didn't realise. So thank you everyone again for coming along, and it would be you know, great to keep having this conversation and carry it on, and hopefully change the conditions and the you know, just the way we're viewed, the way we're treated, etc. So yeah, see you next month hopefully, and yeah, let you know how the conference goes, if it goes through. Okay, take care.
Thanks, that was great. Thank you.
Cheers. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tim. Good luck at the conference.
Bye.
Thank you. See you then. Okay, bye. Okay, so just to finish off, earlier I promised I'd read a copy of the resolution for anybody who wants to hear it. So for those of you that do, here you go. There's an increasing involvement of peer and lived experience workers within mental health services. These are individuals whose role is framed by making constructive use of personal experiences of their own mental health difficulties and vulnerabilities. Such roles exist in a number of different contexts where such use of self is valued as the key element of professional identity, adding a unique contribution to the work of wider teams where they are working openly from an experiential lens. Such workers are employed in a variety of settings, including the NHS, voluntary sector, and private mental health services. Also in universities responsible for mental health research and practitioner education, and within a broader NHS system such as NHS England and Health Education England. Indeed, some individuals are operating in unpaid roles. Job titles are varied and reflect the proliferation of such roles. Examples include peer support workers, lived experience researchers, lived experience consultants, lived experience educators, trainers, and facilitators. Lived experience workers are either already Unison members or are potential Unison members. Arguably, our union needs to provide a bespoke offer to this particular group of workers to better service their needs and interests. From an employment relations perspective, there are a number of points of concern with regard to fair terms and conditions, job security, and career advancement opportunities. Lived experience workers are concentrated in lower agenda for change bands. Agenda for change bands are NHS sort of hierarchical bands, which basically show what you get paid. And most lived experience workers are in shitty ones. Okay, so lived experience workers are concentrated in lower agenda for change bands, subject to inequities of fixed term contracts or sessional work, and do not typically progress to senior pay bands or managerial positions. The national picture is varied, but it is not necessarily typical that lived experience workers are managed or receive supervision from more senior lived experience workers. There are also reports of tensions between the wider workforce and lived experience workers, and services would benefit from support, education, and development to improve these relations and more supportively accommodate the contribution of lived experience workers. It is important that these roles are used appropriately and not as a way of undercutting the skill mix and terms and conditions of the wider workforce. This interface is often between nurses and lived experience workers. The requirement in these job roles is to draw upon one's own history of mental health problems and disclose shared experiences and vulnerabilities is cumulatively taxing and stressful for this workforce. Appropriate supportive supervision is an essential requirement to protect workers' welfare, though this is not always available. So this is the actual proposal that Unison, the Midwifery and Nursing Directorate are going to put forward. Conference calls on the Health Service Group Executive to commit the nursing sector, so this is number one, commit the nursing sector reporting to the Service Group Executive to a piece of work to shape Unison's response to the employment needs of lived experience workers. This to involve production of guidance for the whole workforce to better support the contribution of lived experience workers. Number two, to conduct a scoping exercise of the range of lived experience roles and terms and conditions with a view to building a campaign for improved terms and conditions, job security and career progression for lived experience workers. 3, work with stakeholder organisations to develop the education, training and supervision requirements appropriate for the group. And 4, accomplish these objectives in alliance with appropriate groups, such as the Unison, which is the National Survivor User Network, which is a lived experience-led organisation. And that is the proposal being put forward by the Nursing and Midwifery Occupational Group.